Using a fairly straightforward and simple workflow for sculpting in Blender, we're going to create some custom bases for your Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniatures. Well, it's been a few weeks, but I'm back making videos. I spent the last, 3 or 4 weeks here delivering on my recently successful Kickstarter, sending out all the STL files for these miniatures back here. If you missed out on that, they'll be available for sale sometime in the not too distant future. But we're talking about custom bases for Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniatures, and I'm going to work on a Lizardmen one for my Seraphon Old Blood on a Carnosaur here. But this process can really work for any Warhammer Age of Sigmar miniature, whether it be for the Sigmarines, whatever they're called these days, Stormcast Eternals, I always call them the Sigmarines, Chaos, whatever. You're just going to use a little bit of different image assets here and there to help you along as you see during this process. I'm using Blender 3 point something, so anything in that range will work great for you. Let's jump over to software and get things started. The first step here is to bring in a scanned image of the miniature's base into Blender, and I've added it as a reference image and dropped it a little bit below kind of your basic plane as you see there. All I did was I put this base on my scanner and scanned the image in. The challenge you have here is that there's an annoying feature of Games Workshop's bases in that they're not actually like spheres stretched out. They're a little bit different. Therefore, to create this base, I need to use a Bezier circle and match the shape of the base inside Blender. Now, a slight disclaimer here is this will get you a base that's very, very close to the real size and shape. You will be off though probably by a millimeter or two, which might make some tournament organizers a bit cranky. That looks pretty close. I'm satisfied with it. So we're going to select all the handles for our Bezier circle, and then I'm going to subdivide. And this is going to require me to make some more adjustments to the shape to make sure that I'm staying kind of to the right proper shape here. Then repeat that process maybe 2 more times. In a moment here, we're going to convert this curve over to a mesh, and those extra subdivisions here in the curve process are to make that mesh look a little bit nicer. Let's jump out of our edit mode, and then I can go ahead, right click, choose convert to mesh, and then press tab to go back into edit mode, and we've got a whole bunch of tiny little vertices. Now the trick comes in to try to figure out where exactly the opposite ends of the vertices are, and that looks about right there. You don't have to be perfect, just close enough. Because what we need to do now is try and scale it up to the right size. So I've selected what appears to be the opposite vertices on either side in terms of basically the ends of the base. And Blender has a plugin that you have to enable called Measure It. And if I press N over here and go to View, I've already enabled the Measure It tools. And by having these 2 vertices selected, I can add a segment and then choose Show. And I can see here now that they are 4.88 meters apart, which in 3D printing land is actually 4.88 millimeters apart. And well, that number is far short of the official size of 120 by 92 millimeters. Jump out of edit mode. I'm going to scale this thing up until we're at 120. And now to verify things a little bit, I want to just choose 2 more vertices that are probably the cross axes, and hopefully this is around 92. They're 93, close enough. So yeah, the base is 1 millimeter off, but you know, that's what you get doing this method. Select everything, we're going to add a face, and then I'm going to press E to extrude it up a tiny bit. Now this should be about 3 millimeters tall, so let me just select any 2 of these vertices, add another segment over here, and then adjust the height until it's around 3 millimeters or so. That's about the size of Warhammer bases. Finally, with the top layer selected here, just scale in a tiny little bit to give that effect of the slam that you usually also see on Warhammer bases. And that's pretty close to the final base size for my Seraphon Old Blood on a Carnosaur. So I'm going to add a few cubes to get kind of the rough shape of pieces of a ruined Lizardmen temple that I want my Seraphon Old Blood to be standing on. So we're just going to add in a new cube. And then let me just kind of scale it up to, I don't know, it's basically kind of picking a size that looks good to you. It's probably a little big. And I want to make sure it's kind of living in the base a little bit. And let me drag this one over here. I then want to create a second one. This one, however, is going to be pretty small, like it's more like a tile. So these are going to be our two rough sizes. And in a moment here, we're going to start doing some sculpting and make it look kind of like ruined rocks. And then we'll go from there. However, what you need to do to make sure the sculpting works correctly is you got to apply scale. This is a background mathematical thing. You just have to do it, otherwise your sculpting could act very weird. Hold down Control and A, and then choose Scale. Now you're not going to visibly see anything, but up here in the corner, if you have the item details selected, you can see the scale XYZ. Right now they're all 9.7 something. When I choose Control A and apply scale, that's going to reset to 1. It just makes Blender math happy. Now for both of these, I'm going to jump into edit mode. I am going to then go to edge select mode. I'm going to select the top 4 edges like that and the 4 edges around the sides that make up the walls, but not the bottom edges. We're going to do Control B for bevel. And let's pull it out to something like that. And then open up the little bevel box down here. And for segments, I don't know, let's do like 3. So what you're going for is to kind of look like there's a little bit of kind of smooth edges to the rocks. Maybe that was done intentionally, maybe that's erosion, whatever. Same process over here then. Now I'm just going to lay out a few of these pieces and kind of make them look like they're a rough tile layout. And I'm just duplicating them and moving them around. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's kind of like a ruined, like temple type thing. And you'll fill in details in between these blocks with whatever type of basing material you would end up putting on the base. I then want to rotate these so they're not quite as nice and smooth. It's more like they're kind of tilted a little bit to look like they've just been sunk in the mud, destroyed, whatever it may be. The important thing here is you want to make sure that whatever the piece is in its final position, that it is fully embedded within the actual base itself. And of course, it is always up to you to decide how many of these tiles and rocks and things you want. More probably looks cooler, but it also means more work, more printing time, all that fun stuff. So I'll leave it up to you to make that decision for yourself. I'm then going to combine all this rocks and stones and tiles together. I am not combining them to the base. We're just going to make these stone tile pieces be all one object so I can sculpt them all at once. At this point I can jump over to sculpt mode up here in the corner. And for the most part I am going to be working with clay strips. There are a few options we want to choose under tools. Under advanced, let's choose front faces only. And then I am going to enable a dynamic typology. This little warning pops up that's not relevant to us today. And let's set this to 5 and see if that's good enough. At this point, I just want to create the illusion of kind of worn down, damaged rocks. And then for this first part where I'm kind of creating the effect of ruined rocks, I'm going to work mostly with subtraction. So I'm going to choose subtract over here as well. And I'm just very carefully adding indents and interesting features into these pieces. Keep in mind that if you're going to be using a FFF 3D printer, you may just need to exaggerate detail a lot more to actually see it. Alright, so I've got my basic sculpting done. I want to jump back over to edit mode for a moment, and what you're going to notice here is because of that dynamic typology, I've added a whole bunch of vertices to my model, which some 3D printer slicer programs can get a bit cranky if you really add lots of them. So what I want to do is jump to object mode. We're going to go over to our modifiers tab. So I'm going to select the modifier called decimate. And what this will do is it'll reduce number of vertices without actually, well, minimally impacting detail. So for the ratio, let's choose 0.25, which will reduce your vertices to 1/4 the original count. I'm going to press this little arrow here, choose apply. And then if I jump back into edit mode, you can see now there's a lot fewer vertices than there were just a little bit ago. Now this isn't a half bad little start if you just want some generic ruined rocks for a base. This is how you can do it. But let's take this up a little bit further in terms of quality. What I want to do is I'm going to add another reference image in here. And it's going to be hiding down here somewhere, so I need to drag it up above my miniature. And what I've just brought in is I scanned in a handful of icons from the Lizardmen, or Seraphon, fine. Over here on the right-hand side, we want to choose the object data properties. When we have a reference image selected, let's choose opacity, and I can turn this down a little bit, and now I can see through my image to the object below. And then I'm going to scale up my reference image until it's like, let's see, what looks kind of cool. Something kind of like that. So I'm kind of positioning the reference image over one of my little blocks. And now, this is where things get a little bit dicey if you want. Let me select the underlying block. We're going to go back to sculpt mode. I'm going to change my direction to add at this point, and I'm going to re-enable my dynamic typology. We're going to make it even more brutally dangerous by changing that to 3. And what I can start to do now is very roughly, granted this is like a nice ruined temple structure, but you can kind of get the illusion that at some point there was, this icon of the Seraphon that was built in to this little block. Let's kind of see how that looks. You can see it's like, well, there's evidence that it was there, but it's obviously kind of ruined and worn out. And it's kind of up to you as how much work you want to put into this step. And once again, you do have to think a little bit about resin versus FFF 3D printers. But let me show you how you can use some of the other tools to do some interesting effects to this piece. First of all, I'm going to just add a little bit more material to make it stand out a little bit more. Let's hold down Shift, and what that should do by default is it puts you into smooth mode, where you can kind of smooth out some of these, inaccuracies or kind of roughness that was created by just slamming down as much clay strips as possible. And then you have a process of kind of just adding some material and then smoothing it out to get something that you kind of like. You're not going to get a super accurate type of effect this way, but you are going to get kind of that illusion of old, worn down carved stone, which is what we're going for. Then we have a tool over here called Pinch. And what this can do, we run on a small size, and you kind of run it along the edge of a raised section. It'll help to make the edges of that a little bit more well-defined. It takes your clay material and kind of pushing it into a very narrow, kind of hard edge. Then something you can use alongside this is another tool called Crease up here. And if you run this along the base of where detail is raised up, it'll kind of make a bit of a crease along the base of the detail, and this kind of will help you increase some of that visual contrast for miniatures. So it's sort of the inverse-ish of Pinch, and therefore that's why I'm running it along the base of the detail instead of the top of the detail. And then another shortcut you can work with, say if we go back to our clay strips, I was over here throughout this time playing with add and subtract, but if you press Control, what that does is going to use the inverse of whatever you have selected. So right now add is selected. If I hit Control, it's going to start using subtraction, allow me to kind of cut out some of these areas of my design. I mean, that's a basic gist of how you'd approach making a base like this with some of the Lizardmen iconography. Let me just jump ahead a while and create some more of this, and we'll see how it looks when it's all done. And going through adding some more details here and there based on the images of the iconography, I've got something like this, which I think will work pretty well for a base. Now there are several more steps that we need to take before we can send this off to our slicer program. First things first here, let's go to the modifier with our detailed rock selected, and I want to repeat the decimate modifier, and this time start with a value around 0.25. But feel free to adjust it up or down depending if it impacts the details of your sculpting. If it seems like it's destroying some detail, then raise the number up to like 0.5 or something higher. If not, then 0.25 will be fine. Then I'm going to go ahead and join the rocks to the base. We're going to jump into edit mode, select everything, and choose Shift N. And what this does is something called recalculate normals down here in the corner. There's nothing exciting going on there, just ignore that. Kind of like with apply scale, this is a Blender math thing and is important for the STL process. The last step then, we're going to select the object, go up to File, Export STL, and be sure to choose the option for selection only. And then once you export it as an STL file, you can jump over to your slicer program, print it out, and go from there. And that is about it. Once you've got your base printed up, I'll text it up however you want to do it. You get your miniature on there, and things look pretty darn good. Now, of course, the amount of time you spend during this process can result in more elaborate or simple bases. It's all a trade-off, and it's up to you. So hopefully you found some of those basic techniques helpful for sculpting in Blender and getting started in that process. If you go further down this path, you will eventually end up making your own miniatures, but that's a bit further along than just doing some simple details on a base. So thank you guys all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and I'll see you guys all next time.